Yeah.
Especially when yours is going to be read public, right?
Yeah.
So it definitely talks about the opposite aspect of writing. You are talking about the good and joyful aspect of writing. And this one is talking about the terrifying side of writing. So see, can be very different. You are positive, yeah, and that's a good thing. So you like writing, you enjoy writing. So what about the second one, group 2? You want to read yours?
So writing is like an onion. Initially, when you first observe an onion, it might be looked as a chunk of vegetable. However, as you peel the onion, there are different layers and each layer is similar yet different. Having unique characters, like onion, writing process is different layers and has different layers, and each element has its own uniqueness. Thus, unless you closely observe the writing, you won't sense the different unique layers that have unique meaning and purpose.
So he used the words layers and unique certain times, just like the author in our reading talked about the green martinez several times. So the most comparable feature between these two, writing and onion, are the layers. And that's his opinion. And do you all agree with that? Okay, let's see what my sample came up with. A layer of meaning. There is just one more below. You want to write too quickly, to cut too deeply into your soul, and you may end up with tears. And that's another layer of this example. And you like that?
That's so poetic.
So pathetic.
Poetic.
Poetic. Yeah, well, metaphors are used in poems most of the time, so we don't really use them in the academic writing. But there is one that is really famous I will show you later on. So, yeah, this one is pretty similar. At least the direction is pretty similar to yours. So, group 3, Jasmine and Keenan.
Yeah.
You had 2, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
The first is the writer writes continuously. So he's like a mechanic.
Mechanic.
And the second is the writer has his or her own idea already. So he or she knows what should be writing about. So he or she like a other mechanic.
So, yeah. So this one, mechanic, as when it's compared to the first one, when they talk about a writer being not knowing what he is going to see is like an explorer. This one is more like being a trained writer, an experienced writer
Yeah.
who knows the process so well that he can almost, he has it in his own mind and then just lay it out according to an outline or plan, right? So that's another aspect of writing. Now, what do you have?
The writer is like an auto mechanic. He or she follows the same process in every project, starting with an introduction, moving to the body, and finishing with a conclusion.
Yeah, so that's what we've all been talking about throughout the semester. You have the introduction, the body paragraphs, and the conclusion, and he ties this metaphor into what we've been doing. So this one is comparing two persons, but doing different jobs, but that's one feature of the writer as a whole. Okay? Number 4, or number 5. Your group did number 4, right? Okay.
Writing is a good wholesome soup. There is always something undiscovered or surprising in any piece of writing before you read it. Just like you can never tell what there is in a soup, onion, meat, corn, potato, or tomato before you eat it. Reading a good piece of writing is like eating a bowl of wonderful soup. It will make you feel warm and pleasant and pull you out of any trouble of life and filling your empty mind, just like eating the warm soup to get rid of cold and stirring.
Okay. So you talked about like 2 features of the soup. One is you don't know what you're going to have, and the second is being like a signal of, or a symbol of warmth and, you know, like say like being really warm and really, not sweet, but you have the feeling of home. And then another comparison is writing versus reading. So writing as making the soup, whereas reading being tasting of the soup, right? So how did you like that? Well, they had something pretty uncommon to start with, right? And they were being quite creative on that. Let's see, okay. So number 3, we didn't look at this, but I think it's the similar idea. Well, he is never quite satisfied that everything is running as smoothly as possible. So this sentence is actually talking about the editing process that we talked about earlier in the semester. When you revise it, you look at it over and over again, and then making adjustments. Listening to the well-tuned words makes the writer a happy man. So it's actually quite different from what you two were talking about. You were talking about like the repetition of the process, where this one is talking about the revision process. But still, they are certain features that are same that both parties can take. Okay, and then the last one about the soup begins with the best stop, made out of the bones and gristle and special grammar. So it actually leaves not only the potatoes or tomatoes that you wrote about in it, it also puts the grammar, which goes back to the writing. So the metaphor jumps back and forth in between the real thing and the thing it's comparing, or the analogy that it's comparing with. But then we have fresh, usually used to describe vegetables, just like you talked about, and then adjectives and metaphor this goes back to writing again. So spicing, and that's also an adjective that you would use, actually a verb that you would use for making food, and then the taste of it can be used for both writing and the soup. Okay, so the very last one is a field after a fresh spring rain. No one actually write about this, but let me just read it through to see like if it's really different from your own imagination. So this is just a warm-up exercise for you to think about metaphors. But I haven't really said what metaphor is and how to create them, but of course you guys can do it. But let's watch this video for a few minutes.
Metaphor lives a secret life all around us. We utter about 6 metaphors a minute. Metaphorical thinking is essential to how we understand ourselves and others, how we communicate, learn, discover, and invent. A metaphor is a way of thought before it is a way with words. Now, to assist me in explaining this, I've enlisted the help of one of our greatest philosophers, the reigning king of the metaphorians, a man whose contributions to the field are so great that he himself has become a metaphor. I am, of course, referring to none other than Elvis Presley. Now, All Shook Up is a great love song. It's also a great example of how, whenever we deal with anything abstract, ideas, emotions, feelings, concepts, thoughts, we inevitably resort to metaphor. In All Shook Up, a touch is not a touch, but a chill. Lips are not lips, but volcanoes. She is not she, but a buttercup. And love is not love, but being all shook up. In this, Elvis is following Aristotle's classic definition of metaphor as the process of giving the thing a name that belongs to something else. This is the mathematics of metaphor. Fortunately, it's very simple. X equals Y. This formula works wherever metaphor is present. Elvis uses it, but so does Shakespeare. This famous line from Romeo and Juliet, Juliet is the sun. Now here, Shakespeare gives the thing, Juliet, a name that belongs to something else, the sun. But whenever we give a thing a name that belongs to something else, we give it a whole network of analogies too. We mix and match what we know about the metaphor's source, in this case the sun, with what we know about its target, Juliet. And metaphor gives us a much more vivid understanding of Juliet than if Shakespeare had literally described what she looks like. So, how do we make and understand metaphors? This might look familiar. The first step is pattern recognition. Look at this image. What do you see? 3 wayward packmen and 3 pointy brackets are actually present. What we see, however, are 2 overlapping triangles. Metaphor is not just the detection of patterns, it is the creation of patterns. Second step, conceptual synesthesia. Now, synesthesia is the experience of a stimulus in one sense organ in another sense organ as well, such as colored hearing. People with colored hearing actually see colors when they hear the sounds of words or letters. We all have synesthetic abilities. This is the Buba Kiki test. What you have to do is identify which of these shapes is called Buba and which is called Kiki. If you're like 98% of other people, you will identify the round amoeboid shape as Buba and the sharp spiky one as Kiki. Can we do a quick show of hands? Does that correspond? Okay, I think 99.9 would about cover it. Why do we do that? Because we instinctively find or create a pattern between the round shape and the round sound of Buba and the spiky shape and the spiky sound of Kiki. And many of the metaphors we use every day are synesthetic. Silence is sweet. Neckties are loud. Sexually attractive people are hot. Sexually unattractive people leave us cold. Metaphor creates a kind of conceptual synesthesia in which we understand one concept in the context of another. Third step is cognitive dissonance. This is the stroke test. What you need to do here is identify as quickly as possible the color of the ink in which these words are printed. You can take the test now. If you're like most people, you will experience a moment of cognitive dissonance when the name of the color is printed in a differently colored ink. The test shows that we cannot ignore the literal meaning of words, even when the literal meaning gives the wrong answer. Stroke tests have been done with metaphor as well, and participants had to identify as quickly as possible the literally false sentences. They took longer to reject metaphors as false than they did to reject literally false sentences. Why? Because we cannot ignore the metaphorical meaning of words either. One of the sentences was, "Some jobs are jails." Now, unless you're a prison guard, the sentence, "Some jobs are jails," is literally false. Sadly, it's metaphorically true, and the metaphorical truth interferes with our ability to identify it as literally false. Metaphor matters because it's around us every day, all the time. Metaphor matters because it creates expectations. Pay careful attention the next time you read the financial news. Agent metaphors describe price movements as the deliberate action of a living thing, as in the Nasdaq climbed higher. Object metaphors describe price movements as non-living things, as in the Dow fell like a brick. Researchers asked a group of people to read a clutch of market commentaries and then predict the next day's price trend. Those exposed to agent metaphors had higher expectations that the price trends would continue. They had those expectations because agent metaphors imply the deliberate action of a living thing pursuing a goal. If, for example, house prices are routinely described as climbing and climbing higher and higher, people might naturally assume that that rise is unstoppable. They may feel confident, say, in taking out mortgages they really can't afford. Now, that's a hypothetical example, of course, but this is how metaphor misleads. Metaphor also matters because it influences decisions by activating analogies. A group of students was told that a small democratic country had been invaded and had asked the US for help, and they had to make a decision. What should they do? Intervene, appeal to the UN, or do nothing? They were each then given one of three descriptions of this hypothetical crisis, each of which was designed to trigger a different historical analogy. World War II, Vietnam, and the third was historically neutral. Those exposed to the World War II scenario made more interventionist recommendations than the others. Just as we cannot ignore the literal meaning of words, we cannot ignore the analogies that are triggered by metaphor. Metaphor matters because it opens the door to discovery. Whenever we solve a problem or make a discovery, we compare what we know with what we don't know. And the only way to find out about the latter is to investigate the ways it might be like the former. Einstein described his scientific method as combinatory play. He famously used thought experiments, which are essentially elaborate analogies, to come up with some of his greatest discoveries. By bringing together what we know and what we don't know through analogy, metaphorical thinking strikes the spark that ignites discovery. Now, metaphor is ubiquitous, yet it's hidden. But you just have to look at the words around you, and you'll find it. Ralph Waldo Emerson described language as fossil poetry. But before it was fossil poetry, language was fossil metaphor. And these fossils still breathe. Take the three most famous words in all of Western philosophy, cogito ergo sum. It's routinely translated as I think, therefore I am. But there's a better translation. The Latin word cogito is derived from the prefix co, meaning together, and the verb agitare, meaning to shake. So the original meaning of cogito is to shake together. And the proper translation of cogito ergo sum is I shake things up, therefore I am. Metaphor shakes things up, giving us everything from Shakespeare to scientific discovery in the process. The mind is a plastic snow dome, most beautiful, most interesting, and most itself when, as Elvis put it, it's all shook up. And metaphor keeps the mind shaking, rattling, and rolling long after Elvis has left the building. Thank you very much.
So, did you like it? Think about these two questions. Why do we use metaphors and when to use metaphors? Um, kind of based on this video or your previous thoughts about that. Kenan?
We use it to emphasize ideas we have in mind.
Emphasize ideas and also to make links between things that you already know and then based on that build up or expand the knowledge. So it's kind of like filling in the gap, right? And when to use them?
All the time.
All the time. All the time. And actually, like this guy is trying to say that language is a metaphor itself. Like I see this as a table. You see it, but in different languages, tables are different words, and each of them could be considered a metaphor. So you're putting a concrete thing into abstract words, and that could be considered a metaphor in a broad sense, right? And when to use them, I do want to warn you about using them in academic context, because it can be very risky. Like the examples we still haven't been going into, but why to use metaphors? These are what I found off of the Purdue OWL website. So they, of course, enliven ordinary language, and they're generous to readers and listeners, and they encourage interpretation. Just like the 5 sentences I had you write about, the metaphors were there, but your interpretation or your expansion could be very different, right? It again reflects what the writer thinks about things. You guys are positive, and they are kind of along the lines of what the original writers are. So it reflects your personal beliefs, your personal values on things, or your perceptions of things. And in terms of efficiency and being economical, they are better than ordinary language, and just by a minimum number of words, they can like pose a great amount of meaning that you're trying to convey. So that is also related to the second point, that because it requires interpretation, it encourages interpretation, you will be very efficient in pronouncing words. Now think about any language. When you're familiar enough with that language, you want to be efficient. Just like you use contractions in a lot of your essays, which you shouldn't really be using for writing, but you use contractions, don'ts, instead of do not. You just want to be efficient. So that is also why metaphors are used in writing, for the same reason, right? And then, in order to be creative, they create new meanings, and they allow you to write about your feelings, thoughts, things, experiences, for which there are no easy words that are necessary. So they are necessary for you guys as writers, and also they're also necessary for readers in order to better understand your writing. So these are different definitions developed by different people on metaphors. Of course, you know what it is, and the guy in the video just simply said metaphor is x equals 1. So these are basically comparable to what that definition is. So such as the act of giving a thing a name that belongs to something else, and that's very simple. Thing A is the x, and something else is the y. And then this longer one, the transferring of things and words from their proper signification to an improper similitude for the sake of beauty, necessity, polish, or emphasis. So a lot of different definitions for metaphors. And there are different kinds of metaphors. Like the first one is implied metaphor, so a less direct metaphor. And mixed metaphor is often should be avoided because you're kind of putting different things that shouldn't go together in the same metaphor. And this one is really interesting. A dead metaphor is actually ordinary language because it's been used so widely that everyone knows it, and it's been fossilized, just like he talked about in the video. It's been fossilized over time, and then we consider it as ordinary language. So can you think of examples of dead metaphors? Maybe in your own language too, if you can explain it.
One bird in the hand is better than 10 on the tree.
A bird.
In your hand is better than 10 on the tree.
Sorry,
A bird in your hand
in 10
is better than 10 on the tree.
is better than 10 on the tree. Okay, a bird in your hand is better than 10 on the tree. So that one is kind of incorporated into ordinary language. What about others?
A frog, you know.
Frog?
Does that have it in English? Like a frog, you know, well.
Okay, well, I think so. Like in the bottom of a well. At least we have that in Chinese. Do you have that in your language? No? A frog at the bottom of a well. It means like you are so narrow-minded or narrow-sighted that you only see the sky as being like a circle of like the top of the well.